Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are and world and what time you're watching this and whether it's a replay. This is Enterprise Code Rage 2022. My name is Ian Barker, and I'm an Embarcadero Delphi MVP. You can get me on ian.barker@gmail.com, or you can follow me on Twitter at punctuation whilst it's still around. There's all sorts of drama going on around that. And you can reach me on my website at about.me/Ian Barker. This session is Enterprise iOS Apps No App Store Required. Okay, so the Apple App Store. Love it or hate it. The Apple App Store is the walled garden of curated apps which have passed Apple's final approval. The approval process itself is a little bit arduous. They seem to be very, very fussy, and I understand why. It's a lot to do with trying to keep the credibility and the viability of the App Store intact. That's ostensibly what it's all about. Making sure that there aren't apps in there that do suspicious or horrible things, no viruses and no other traumatic incidences. That's what it's about. Because of that, it can be extremely difficult to get your app into the App Store and pass the approval process. It's common for most new developers to be rejected multiple times. That's just the way it goes. Unlike Windows and Android, there is no other way to get apps onto iOS devices. Or is there? Well, yes, there is. And that other way is known as Apple Enterprise Apps. There is an Apple Developer Enterprise Program, and this doesn't use normal Apple App Store. You don't go through it at all. It is a very specific program designed for companies, and the companies are verified by Apple, and it costs you money to join. You have to pay that yearly, and the approval process, it does actually make sure that you are a genuine company and you're not just a sole trader or something like that who's going, you know what, I'll avoid the whole approval process and launch my app and make millions. That is not what this program is for. It's designed for companies very specifically. It is a scheme which allows companies to develop in-house iOS apps for use by their own staff in the company, and also contractors and people like that. One of my customers, for example, is the visiting nurses, as you'll see later on, and the apps that they use are for their own staff or employees, but they also have several contract healthcare staff who are working on behalf of the company, and this is allowed in the Apple iOS Enterprise program for them to actually use the apps as well. The apps that they use are specific to the tasks that they're carrying out on behalf of the visiting nurses. It's not free. It costs money to join, and that money costs you more than the regular Apple iOS developer program. If you're a regular developer and you want to create iOS apps, then it costs you, I think it's $100 and something US every year, and for companies it's actually $299 US, or whatever your equivalent is in your local currency. And yes, you pay yearly. The companies are verified by Apple, and the way that they're verified is using a DUNS number, which we'll talk about in a moment. And they also make sure that any public records, like in the UK Companies House, for example, that you exist. Once you get through that process, then it's actually pretty generous in the sense that the apps can be distributed directly to company curated devices. You can do that using a tool called MDM. They've got a few other ways of doing it. Or you can even download the apps directly from a special web page that's got some embedded metadata in it, which we'll talk about later as well. The developers themselves are either in-house developers that work for the company. So let's say you're a company called widgets.com and you make widgets, and you've got your own iOS developers that produce apps that are used internally to manage the process of making widgets. Then you could be part of that program for the in-house developers. But of course, iOS developers, luckily, programmers in general, software developers, are quite expensive, and so it's very common for people to use external contractors. and many of you that are listening may well fall into that category. If you're an external contractor, then what happens is you join the enterprise's team, which is the terminology that Apple use, and once you've joined that team, you can then create apps and sign apps with the Apple Enterprise iOS code signing certificates, and create IDs for the apps and all the other things that you need to do. If you're a developer, it allows you to create apps for corporate customers. Now, this can be very lucrative, and the reason is that you can do much more than just go through the App Store, and I'll show you some figures in a minute which will turn your hair white, if indeed you've got hair, unlike me. But it can be much more lucrative than the App Store. You can sell your development labor, your time, and you can sell people consultancy as well, and advising them on the best way to go about apps and the best things to put in apps, because if they're enterprise customers, it might not be their main focus of business is developing apps. Unlike a software house, it could be that they just make widgets and that's what they understand. They know broadly what they want their app to do, but they might not necessarily understand the best ways to achieve that, like how to scan barcodes and get them into stock and how to use REST servers or something like that. So there is some consultancy behind there that you can sell your time for, as well as the actual labor of writing the program, hourly rate or something like that. You can also sell technical support and training, and if you do a good job, then you should get some repeat business. Perhaps one of the best things is you don't pay any royalties to Apple. If your customer takes their enterprise apps and gives them out to 15,000 people, I think there is actually a limit, but let's say 1,500, 1,500 people, they don't pay Apple a penny. It doesn't matter how many internal corporate enterprise iOS apps that they produce, they don't pay Apple anything more than their yearly fees. It's designed for being used in-house. There is no approval process. You don't even need to tell Apple anything about the app, whether you're doing anything shady. I'm sure you wouldn't, but let's say you're gathering information, personal data, something horrible, you'll still need to get your app to actually accept those permissions so that the people who are using the apps know that's going on. But there's no approval process to go through with Apple. So if you wanted to create a flashlight app for the business, then you could do that. Whereas with the normal iOS App Store process, creating a flashlight app is actually specifically forbidden. It's one of the things they tell you can't do. Weird but true. There are no guidelines either, so you can ignore certain things like navigational design paradigms and stuff like that. My personal advice would be stick to the guidelines as if it was going to go in the App Store, so that people, when they use the apps, they're familiar with what they're seeing and it doesn't seem weird and bizarre and clunky. But you don't have to. If you want to make it look like an Android app on an iOS device, fine, go ahead. If you want to completely ignore all the norms for designing the iOS apps, then go ahead. The enterprise program doesn't care at all. Now, is selling via the App Store profitable? Is it likely that you would make more money writing an app and then selling it to your corporate customer, giving them some kind of discount, which you can do via the App Store, or just saying to them, hey, it's on the App Store, download it and just pay the fees? Let's look at some figures and work that out. The standard App Store commission is 30%. However, unless you're very, very lucky and you're earning more than $1 million a year, if you're below that $1 million threshold, then it's actually only 15%. And that was something that Apple introduced a while ago, a couple of years back, under pressure, because people were saying, hey, this is disgraceful. You're taking 30% of our money, and we're poor, broke software developers. So they caved into some pressure from the EU and a few other places and introduced this small business program. Their argument was they just wanted to help developers out, but I could be sceptical. I think these large blue chip behemoths perhaps not quite as generous as they sound, but that's what it's there for. So 15% if you earn less than $1 million a year. If you compare that to enterprise membership, which is a flat fee, a one-off fee per year of $299, and you can create as many apps as you like, and they can go to as many employees of the company or contractors of the company, as you like, then you're obviously, you're costing the enterprise less money if they're in return for your fees and your salary. If you want to look at whether selling via the App Store is profitable, let's compare this to the US minimum wage, which currently on average is $7.25. Now, if you were to factor in the Apple fees and the tax, and this calculation on the left is a bit iffy, so don't bother mailing me or messaging me and saying, hey, that's not how you work out the tax. I just did a rough calculation to say let's add some fees on top. But if you're trying to make a comparable profit from the App Store of the US minimum wage, assuming you work 40 hours a week, 8 hours a day, 52 weeks of the year, then you would have to sell 3,445 copies of your app to make the same as minimum wage. And that app would need to sell for $4.99 each. Now, that's unusual. That price is probably not something that's very common in the App Store. The common price is anything between 99 cents for something that's not known to maybe as much as $15, but the typical median price seems to be around about $4.99. So if we take that figure, then you've got to sell 3,445 before you can make a profit, or at least make the same profit as you would on the minimum wage working in a burger joint or something like that. If you increase the value of your sales and someone's paying, say, $24.99 per app, which would put you really in the higher bracket of costs for apps, then you need to sell 688 apps every single year just to break even on the minimum wage in the United States. So is the App Store profitable? If you've got a good idea and you guarantee every year to sell many thousands, then yes, you can make money at it. If you take the subscription model on, where your customers are paying you a subscription, software as a service kind of subscription, don't forget that Apple will take a cut on that subscription as well. You can't just put an app up which has got links to signing up somewhere else where you can duck their commission. No, they will take commission on that as well, and they will do it in a slightly awkward way. So it's not really, in my opinion, the best way to make money out of writing iOS apps. I personally, if it was me, I would be selling my skills and consultancy. If you've got a great idea, well, you're going to make a lot of money. How are iOS apps distributed? Well, they are different to the regular iOS apps. They can be distributed simply via email. You can literally email the package around and people can install it that way. You can install it over the air, over Wi-Fi, and we'll talk about that in a moment. You can use iTunes, although this is a method that's not really very common for enterprise apps. Or you can use some enterprise provisioning tools, and specifically it was a product called MDM. There are some others out there as well. Some of them are horrendously expensive to use. Every month there's a fee. Or you can use a specially crafted web page, which is the way I do it. If you set this web page up, you put some metadata in there. The website also needs to include some distribution certificates and things like that on the website. And then your customers, employees, just go to that special web page, probably on a something like a intraweb or something like that, so it's secure. And they click on it and download it and off they go. That's how my customers do it. Updates are super easy compared to the iOS App Store. No waiting for the approval process. No, oh dear, Apple have got some kind of closed off system because there's a new conference coming up and they're freezing the App Store temporarily. No, you don't have to do any of that. You can write your update, code sign it in the regular way, just as you do with any other Delphi or C++ builder app, and then distribute it using one of the methods that we talked about there. What's the difference between an enterprise app and a normal iOS app? An enterprise app is an application that has been signed using an Apple Enterprise Certificate. It's a very specific thing. It's not your regular developer certificates. It's almost always ad hoc. If you're familiar with Delphi and you go to the product type on the project page, the build type. Then you can choose store or ad hoc, and I forget what the other one is. You always choose ad hoc. It's not tied to any specific devices, because in theory with iOS you can use an ad hoc method of distribution. You can then put that onto as many devices as you like, up to a limit, but you need to know the device IDs. They are then frozen on the Apple's page for that Apple app for 12 months. So I think the limit is probably at least 100. It might be 1,000 now. With the ad hoc way of doing it in the regular iOS apps, you have to notify which devices you're going to use and distribute them that way. With the Apple Enterprise apps, you don't need to do that. It doesn't care about which devices it's going to. They install the Apple Enterprise distribution certificate for your organization, and as long as they've got that on there, they can use the app. We actually don't even know which devices are using the app most of the time. Personally, we put telemetry in to find out, but you don't have to. It's not tied to anything specific. And yes, we definitely can create them in Delphi, C++, via RAD Studio, so not a problem. What do you need to get the Enterprise Developer Program registered? Well, the company needs to be registered on that page that you see there, https developer.apple.com/programs/iOS, and look for Apple Enterprise Developer Program. It costs, at the time that we're recording this, $299 a year. US, it's correspondingly similar amounts in different markets around the world. The company must provide Apple with proof that they actually are a legitimate company and not one you've made up just so you can get onto this program and avoid going through the App Store, of course. And to do that, you need to provide a Dun & Bradstreet number. If you go to dnb.com/get-a-duns-number.html, spelled out the way that you see there, you can get a Dun & Bradstreet number. That works in most countries. If you can't do that, the Apple Enterprise Developer Program tells you about other ways to prove who you are. They do validate who you are. You can't just randomly pretend to be a company and get away with it. And by the way, if you do and they catch you out, say goodbye to working with the Apple products ever again, because they will ban you and permanently, and your developers as well. So it's a risk to them. Someone with legal authority for the organization must validate the paperwork. So if, for example, you are a LLC or a limited company or a PLC in the UK or a publicly listed company, it must be someone who's got the legal ability to make agreements for the company. That might be some legal lawyer type person or company secretary or someone who's actually recognized as being someone who can enter into contracts, because you're entering into a binding contract with Apple saying that you're not going to do this, you're not going to do that, and basically just not going to mess them about in terms of misusing this program. Once you've gone through the hoops and you've been approved, you can sign on to the developer portal, and depending on which role you've got in the team, you will then be offered a new drop-down, shall we say, on the developer portal, asking you which team you are. You're either yourself as a regular developer, or you're part of the enterprise team. In this case, I'm using the example of the Visiting Nurses Association of the Midlands in the United States, who are one of my customers. And this is actually how it looks, or looked certainly, when you go to log in. It'll say, which one do you want to be? Do you want to be the Visiting Nurses, or do you want to be yourself, or do you want to be something else? Because I have multiple teams. I pick that team, and then off I go. I'm then doing things to do with that team. The person who is the enterprise customer's administrator is called the agent. And the agent is the person which can then add developers on. Now, in my case, I have a very good working relationship with this customer, and they gave me admin rights. So I am an administrator, which means I can add other people and create and delete certificates and stuff like that. Some organizations might not want to grant you that kind of permission, and in that case then you will you'll just be a normal developer. I forget what the entire set of roles are, but they vary. But in this case, the agent needs to add you. They add you as a developer, and they also will then create an iOS distribution certificate for the enterprise. They will also have your development certificate for the developer, and provisioning profiles for the apps, just the same as you would do if you were a regular developer. You will need to note these down, and at some point you will need to download them onto your Mac. Don't forget, if you are creating iOS Apple apps or macOS Apple apps, you don't need a Mac to actually write the program in the first place. Using RAD Studio, you can actually go off and create the app and design all the forms and write all the code. But the point at which you want to actually create that app for the bundle that's going to be issued out to devices or test it on a device, you will need a Mac. This does work for Intel-based machines and also ARM-based machines. I personally use an ARM-based machine now, but I used an Intel machine for a long time. There are a lot of certificates you need to produce, and someone at the enterprise needs to manage them because they do expire. Every year they need to renew the program, and when they do, some of those certificates expire, and that can stop the apps themselves actually working. Install PA Server just like you do regularly on RAD Studio. If you don't know how to do that, we've got lots of help and advice telling you how to make that happen. And you'll also need Xcode and the correct SDK. If you've got a Mac, or going to be familiar to you to how to do this. If you don't have a Mac and you're thinking about buying one, a Mac Mini M1, for example, is relatively low cost. It's cheaper than most laptops, and it's perfectly adequate for doing the job. That's what I use, and it's absolutely brilliant. But you can use Mac in Cloud and some of the other cloud services to do this. The only thing that you need to obviously put on that Mac is all your certificates and stuff like that, and have a copy of Xcode that's got that installed, because when you go to create the app, you're still doing exactly the same thing. The only difference is at the end, once you sign it with the enterprise certificate. You make the connection just as you do with any other iOS app. So you connect up to your device, and you can test it just as you normally do. And if everything's correctly set up, and you say 64-bit ad hoc, and connect to your Mac, as long as you've already installed the provisioning profile and distribution certificates, and I think you'll need to read the Apple advice for that very carefully to do that, because it's a bit of a rat's nest of complicated click this, click that, download that, open this keychain, and it changes every time they seem to change macOS. But if you've got it all set up right, then you should see your provisioning profiles for your enterprise customer in there. And the developer program name should be the name of your enterprise customer, not yourself. The developer certificate is going to be theirs as well, and the bundle number is still exactly the same as it was before. You put your own bundle number in. Sounds complicated, but once you've got it all sewn up and working, it works fine. Where can you find the IPA package? Well, as I said before, you don't go through the iOS App Store. You can actually explicitly install this onto devices, and you can find that .ipa package in your output directory. So /platform config, so iOS device /64-bit, and in there you will find the name of your project .ipa. That's controlled on the project's compiler option pages. So you go down to the and this is actually from my own machine. So there is my app called the VNA phone list, and there's the IPA package. This is the thing that you need to send out to your customers, employees and users, and need to put on your website or wherever you're going to do it. You can use Testflight, which used to be an independent program, but Apple pulled it up. Go to testflightapp.com. It explains how it works and what it does. It basically allows you to have people that will trial the app on their devices, but also you can distribute the apps this way as well. They also have a tool at Apple called MDM, which is a multi-device manager that allows your enterprise customers to do things like lock down the iPhone, prevent them from going to certain web pages, certain apps, saying, no, you can't install, Spotify or something like that on your company phone. But it also allows you to put your apps on there. The app that needs to go on there is your .ipa package with the distribution certificate for the enterprise. Or you can do a special web page link, which is the way I do it. There is a blog post that will give you this information, and also there's a GitHub set of files that you can download. But basically, your web page needs to be at an absolute maximum this. Okay, which is the ITMS-services href, special href content, and download manifest and do this and your website and your app.name plist. You'll need to have the .mobile provision file, which you'll find when you go to create your certificates. You'll create a provisioning profile, and that will have a .mobile provision extension on it. You will also need a 57 by 57 PNG file for the icon, and a .plist file, which you'll need to amend as well to make sure that it's got the right details in. But again, it'll be obvious. It's not as difficult as it sounds, and I don't really want to go into the details in a webinar because it's just too complicated. The web server must support HTTPS. You have to support that, otherwise the device will not download the mobile provision profile, and also it will not download the .API and install it. If you've got everything done correctly, then you can end up with an app web page that looks like this. And this is a live page. This is one of my customers. This is how they get their people to install it, because they have nurses and clinicians and pharmacists that use these things. They have a secure camera which takes photographs which do not go into the gallery, so that people can't share photographs of patients out to the Facebook or social media. And they also have a specialized phone directory that allows them to look up things like a pharmacist on call and call that pharmacist on call without having to have a great big set of contacts on their phone. It does it all for you. That's just the thing they do. Like I said before, no App Store required. You can just do it from this web page, and no, Apple doesn't need to approve what you're doing or say, oh, sorry, that breaks any rules. No, they have no involvement in it whatsoever once you've actually been genuinely validated as someone that's qualifies for the enterprise program. Enterprise users, once they do download your app, they will not be able to run it immediately. They will actually have to accept the certificate, and what will happen is if they go into their settings on their phone and choose VPN and device management, in there they will see your certificate. I forget what the exact wording is, but it does say something like needs approval or needs to be blocked. It's just an extra security step to stop people downloading viruses using this enterprise system. Once you approve it, then it will light up like that and show the certificate as valid. When you click on that little drop down that you see on the left of the screen, you'll then see the apps that are signed with that particular provisioning profile and distribution certificate. And in this case, I've got two. One is the VNA directory and one is VNA secure camera. And they're both verified. That means that they were signed properly, and the chain of handling from me back down to the person that's installed it on the phone has been validated, and that the enterprise program has been validated. And you know, it's just to make sure that something rogue hasn't been downloaded from the internet or something like that. Top tips that I would give you: number one, put some analytics on your web page. If for some reason your web host or internal web post person makes a mistake, it's possible that they could get to this app, and you want to make sure that you know who's going to this app and who's downloading things. So at the very least, put some kind of analytics on there, because if you see a sudden spike, instead of having 50 people install it, you have 50,000 people install it. Something's very wrong. Secure the web page. It must be secure. You can put a password on it and things like that. I would advise that you get some help from a web designer if it's not your thing. If it's an intraweb, it's a lot easier, because obviously with an intraweb, then it's usually not available outside a corporate walled garden network. Have a not available page suitable for mobile, so that if you need to take the IPA down or something else is wrong with the certificate or something like that, make sure that you've got it's under maintenance kind of thing, so that when people go to that web page, they realise that it's not working. It must work for mobile, because you're really aiming for mobile devices. Make the web page as simple as possible. Again, you're aiming for a handheld device that's portable. Don't want to have it lots of bells and whistles, graphics and things like that. It's just a mechanism for them getting the app if they're doing it as a web page. Include some sort of update mechanism in your app, or push notifications. I personally use, I think it's TMS's web updates. Could be wrong, I forget how I do it. But you can then say, oh, there's a new version available. Because if they've downloaded it already from your web page, you can actually push an update down and it will install it in place. No weird messages or anything like that, no further approval, it'll just update and off you go. And we do that. We also update certain parts of the files. Some of them have got some cached information, and we download those as well. And because again, it's an enterprise app and you're not having to go through the App Store, you don't have to worry about all sorts of weird approvals, shall we say. The only caveat really is that once the enterprise app goes out, anyone with that IPA and the certificate can install it. They do need both parts, so you probably want to make sure that you're securing things properly. But if they've got that mobile provision profile and they've got the IPA, then they can install that app. So if you are making it to work for a specific company and they need to be on a company corporate network to use it, then that's one way that you can secure it to say, oh, hang on, I can't see X or Y main server, therefore I'm not going to run. And so you could put a message up saying, hey, this is not running on our enterprise network. You can't use this app. If you believe this is wrong, then go to your administrator or something like that. But I will take some steps because anybody can use that app. Useful links. There is a blog post that accompanies this, which I'll show you in the slide that comes up in a moment, but a bunch of useful links for downloading some of the example web pages. Also some articles on how to distribute your iOS apps over the air. I wrote these links in 2016 when I first talked about this subject, so I can't guarantee they're still alive because I forgot to check whether they're still valid, but they should be. You'll get the general idea. If not, go to the web archive and look that up. Ad hoc deployments of iOS apps with Delphi Part 2, that's RADsoft. Dun & Bradstreet, about getting the Dun & Bradstreet number to authenticate your company with Apple so that they don't think you're a bunch of hackers. And then various program information from Apple as well. Easy stuff. Personally, I think if you're going to do this, then with a little bit of thought, it can be very lucrative, as I said before. You can charge for your development services, and you then can go to the customer and say, hey, I'll write this app for you for a fixed price or for an hourly rate, and then after that you don't have to pay me any royalties for using the app, and you don't have to use the App Store. That really I've found to be a selling point that a lot of customers like. I actually use these for charities as well, so the charities I actually write for free because I don't think, particularly in the case of the nurses, the visiting nurses are providing hospice services, and they are literally holding the hands of people who are dying. And I believe that they should get all the help they can get. And if I can use my brain power as a programmer to help them, well, then why not? It costs me absolutely nothing but a little bit of time. But I do also do some other things for them they pay for, but it's just that kind of thing where it's costing me nothing and costing them nothing. So that's another kind of plus as well. If you were doing this for some kind of large charity, say Susan J. Komen or something like that, you would be able to give out apps where it would cost Susan J. Komen more than $300. That would be the flat fee that they would pay for the enterprise program, no matter what size they are. So it's quite useful. I think it's another string to your bow. Well, thanks for watching. This has been Enterprise iOS Apps, no App Store required. I wasn't joking. I hope I've demonstrated that is absolutely the case. As I said before, my name is Ian Barker, and I'm an Embarcadero Delphi MVP. You can email me, please do. I will answer you. I'm very, very busy. I'm a working programmer. I get up every day and I start coding from 7 a.m. I'm an early bird. But I write code every day, so I can't always guarantee I'll come back to you immediately, but I will try and reply to everyone's emails. But email me at ian.barker@gmail.com. Follow me on Twitter at @punctuation, or go to about.me/Ian Barker, where you can see various links and things like that to my web pages. Anyway, thanks for watching. Speak to you soon.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ian, for your session and for all your help during the conference or anything else you do. If you want to come on, we can answer questions here. We got about 15 minutes to do that.
It's the second video, and I'm glad to be done with it. You feel like you're just recording lots of stuff over and over again forever. So I answered a few questions, but most of the questions were actually unrelated to the session.
That's what it looks like, yeah.
Yeah, they were just, saying things like, oh, the language should evolve. And I'm like, hey, have you not been paying attention? There's been quite a few things added to the language, and, come up with a great suggestion. And if it's the kind of suggestion that can't be ignored, then people won't ignore it. It's as simple as that. It's a good idea is a good idea. But it's about practicalities of implementing these kind of things as well. It's
so actually, if you're making suggestions, we get a lot of these suggestions on here. You need to go to quality.embarcadero.com and file a feature request. That's what product management sees. So product management's not on here. And even if they were, they would still tell you to go to quality.embarcadero.com. And honestly, what's that?
They're far too busy to be watching webinars.
I mean, they do sometimes. We'll try and watch them. They
running around like this. Everything's falling to pieces. Yeah.
But get it on there. That's the way they track these things. Even if Marco and David, product manager, was on here, that's what they would ask you to do: is go to quality.marketer.com, file it as a bug report or feature request, and that's the tracking mechanism for that. I would say make sure you have good reasoning for it, not just, hey, this would be cool, but say this is why this would be a benefit, and other people can vote up your suggestions as well. So that's also an option to help improve visibility and follow up with it, right? If there's questions asked on it, why about your feature request or bug report, you need to follow up with that as well.
The developer debates we did to do with things like with and I forget what the other ones were, but the with statement, for example, was a classic example of people say, oh, we should really deprecate a particular keyword or structure. And actually, there were plenty of people that were arguing for and against as well. So actually, sometimes a good idea does need a lot of debate before it can see the light of day. And it's not always obvious why people would turn it down. Lots of diverse people use Delphi for lots of different purposes. And it's a bigger picture, shall we say, making a change to the language. Yeah.
So there is a comment here about from CBK about buying third-party components when he upgrades. So this is something I've been involved in a lot, and I'm sure Ian is as well. There's two sides to this, right? If you bought your components with source code, 90% of the time, it will be easily recompiled in the new version. Sometimes there will be some flag that's like, if Delphi version this, all you gotta do is go there and change it so that it includes the current version in that list, right? Some of them will say this version or newer and automatically work. If not, you can do that. When you are buying the new version, though, you are getting new features, another year of support, and supporting the developer of those third-party libraries. So I'm by no means saying stop upgrading. That's not what I'm saying. But you can, 99% of the time, the code will recompile in the new version. It's very rare to have a breaking change. It's one of the things I love about Delphi is its commitment to backwards compatibility.
Compatibility, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's usually pretty easy to do that. So you don't have to buy a new version, although I would encourage you to. Honestly, the incredibly robust third-party component ecosystem is part of what makes Delphi great, and that ecosystem exists because people buy these useful components everybody's making. So
yeah. Anyway, good question, good point made, but there are other things to talk about.
You're ready for the components. So unless you have specific examples, I'm not really sure what you're talking about, because I do this all the time. Even if I'm on a beta, and I have some existing components, I can make them work usually pretty quickly by just changing a couple things, get them to work. So it is possible. The DCU, so if you don't have source code, it's not going to be compatible when a breaking change happens. And so a breaking change, I'm using that in quotes, is when the signature of the units has changed, right? And that's only happens in major releases of Delphi and C++ Builder, not minor releases. So when it's a major release, so for example, going from 10.4 to 11.0 was a major release, but going from 11.0 to 11.1 is a minor release. Minor releases, you don't need to recompile your packages and BPLs, the DCUs. Sometimes you do, but you shouldn't need to. But when you go from major releases, you do. And the reason is because in major releases, we add new functionality to the interfaces of units. So that's why it's not compatible. Yeah. With effort, it could be made to be backwards compatible, but honestly, I don't think it's worth the effort that required on the R&D side for something as simple as recompiling on our major release. Yeah. That's my 2 cents.
Holger says, in case you have the source code, it mostly works right away. This is Delphi and not name removed. Yeah, he's being very subtle there, but yeah, it's true. I mean, Delphi is you can take Delphi 1 programs and compile them in the latest version of Delphi, and 9 times out of 10 they will work absolutely fine. They'll look different and they'll behave different, and you can't really take that program then and put it backwards onto Delphi 1 if you make any changes. But it's the massive strength of Delphi is the robustness and the longevity of programs. I keep saying this repeatedly. If you want an application to run and keep running and be reliable, even though the operating system changes around it, then Delphi is the thing that really does, it absolutely beats everything else. And I mean everything else. .NET and all the rest of it are very great ideas, but the fragility of that system is inherent in the way that they work. They have a, what's the word I'm looking for? A kind of a compromise in the sense that they make it easy to have it work on lots and lots of different types of windows. But unfortunately, in doing that kind of compile once, run everywhere kind of mentality doesn't really make it very robust as soon as somebody changes a bunch of components in Windows. And that happens a lot. As soon as you upgrade to Windows 11, a lot of your programs written in .NET will just stop working. They'll crash, and they'll crash in inexplicable ways. Not true of Delphi. The Delphi programs usually carry on and don't really make any changes. They just work. So
I've had a lot of projects over the years that I've ran into somebody I developed it for years ago or years later, and they're like, I'm like, oh, hey, are you still using it? Like, yeah, it's still working. It's like occasionally I go check and it's like, oh, it's still working. I don't need to do anything. So it's true. They do the program. I mean, obviously you have to write a good program, but
we get terrifying customers who call us up on technical support, and we look them up. We haven't heard of these people. We look them up, and they're like 12 years since they bought the product. Are you still using this? They've never upgraded, and it's still working. And they've done something crazy, like they've upgraded their network and broken everything. But that's not our fault. That's nothing to do with the program. It's they've broken their infrastructure. But yeah, it's a great thing. And taking that program and being able to put it on a Windows server, and it will run as a Windows service on a Windows server, putting it on a Windows 10 commercial. Desktop PC that someone's bought from Walmart or somewhere random like that, and it working is a bigger deal. And Delphi's so good at doing it so silently, people don't realize this is not normal. This is not how it works for majority of other systems. Even things like Python, which is a scripting language, you have to download the version of Python, you have to install all the dependencies and all the rest of it, and there's quite a lot to do. Delphi, quite often you can take a thumb drive, plug it in and run the program, depending on what it is, of course, but run the program directly from that thumb drive, and it'll keep going. And it's a big plus that people don't realize that it makes my life a lot easier. And our support guys love it. It's good for them.
I will. So Alf just asked, is it possible to issue a warning if code contains a string with width? It's not built into RAD Studio, but there are Fix Insight and other static code analysis tools that I believe can have functionality to do that. I know you can add that, for example, I don't think it's in Sonar Delphi yet, but that could be added to Sonar Delphi as well as some other tools. So there are options out there to do that.
I like the fact Alf considers it an error to use the with statement.
That could be considered a code smell, which Alistair didn't really talk about that, but code smells are things where you're like, that could be a problem that And the idea is you want to remove code smells. And so, yeah, some use cases of WIFs could be a code smell. There are conceivably valid uses of it.
I mean, and it can also be that if you're working in a big organization with a group of programmers, there may be a policy where they say we don't use that. It's like, code formatting. Oh, we do the then here and we put the begin here, and it's the same thing with they may say as a company there's nothing wrong with, but as a company policy we don't use it because we prefer not to. And so it's not necessarily there's something wrong with it. It may just be that they choose to avoid that for the benefit of their company rules and regulations, or whatever you want to call them, for a better word. So yeah. So we avoided all the questions about iOS, so that's quite nice. And so I don't have to think any answers up. Because it gets a little bit.
That was really good information, actually. I don't have I've done a lot in the iOS space. I've done a little bit. I probably really should do more, but this is something that comes up a lot, though, is how to distribute the enterprise apps. So
yeah, making iOS apps is just so easy as well. I mean, you create the project, you create an iOS version, and you can pretty much just click add and then add an Android version, and that's it. You've all of a sudden got iOS and an Android app and the same functionality in both apps within reason. I mean, you need to use some common sense about visual paradigms and things like that, whether the navigation is at the top or the bottom and all the rest of it. But it's very easy to do, and isn't that just the strength of FireMonkey, really? And once you add in our favorite skier for Delphi, well, you're cooking on gas. So there you
go. All right, something is sending me messages and making a noise, and I hear. I'm like, where is this coming from?
It's Michaelis. I apologize if I'm saying name wrong. His video just came on, and so it makes a bloop noise. That's probably what the noise is.
Oh, is that where it is? Okay.
Yeah, because I can see it in the corner of my eye. So because he just came back on. So. Hello,
okay.
I'll wave at
him. Right.
We can see him, but he's invisible to the world at the moment. So, yeah,
great.
It's been good. Not a lot of questions, but that's a good thing.
You want to put the link into your blog post and download in the chat here, so everybody can have that, and then we'll give everybody a couple minutes before we start with the next session.
Okay, I'll find that. That means I've got to remember where I put it. But
oh, sorry to put you on the spot there.
Yeah, I'm sure I've got it. Hang on. You know what? It's easier if they just go to the blogs.embarcadero and choose Ian Barker. They'll find all the posts by me, and it's the most recent one. So let me just, here we go. I'll put it in the chat window. So if they go to here and go to the official blog, if they click on that, they'll see all the articles by me, and then it's the most recent two with the two sessions I just did. There's also those blogs also have got the GitHub stuff in there as well. There's a few other articles like Delphi dark mode for detecting dark mode and swapping over automatically, and all the fun things I get up to when I'm drinking a lot of coffee.
Fantastic. Well, that's great. All right.